So to me, the connection to industry and to practice and what's happening in the real world was very important from the very beginning in my research. But at the same time, I wanted to make an impact, and a scholarly impact, you make it when you try to publish more, you try to generalize beyond like a single case, for example, and you try to develop theory that can be applied across many contexts. And so you can generate a higher impact by abstracting and developing theories, right? So my passion for theory development came that way, right? I want to try to make an impact with my work. And initially in my career, I focused very much on grounded theory development, right? So I go out in the field, I do interviews. Nowadays, I work also in collaboration with MIT Scissors. I'm very glad to see also Cynthia Beef here joining us here today. And I work with Bart Wixom there very closely. Hey, Cynthia, it's good to see you. Good to see somebody turn on their camera as well once in a while. No, but it's nice to be in this network with MIT, because similar to my background in Germany, it allows me to stay relevant and closely connected to practice and industry while I do theory work. And the big risk with theory work is that you become disconnected from the real world, and you end up being in the ivory tower and writing theory papers that have no relevance. And I think for me, because of my background and my training, it is super critical to maintain that connection to real world phenomena that are experienced by actual people, right? So that's why today I want to speak about phenomenon-based theorizing or phenomenon-based theory development. In my editorial in JAS, I called it phenomenon-driven theorizing, but it's really the same thing. Fisher et al. And AMR call it phenomenon-based theorizing. So basically, slightly different terminology, but the same thing. So the idea is that we pay very close attention to the phenomenon that we're observing in the real world, and we wanna explain the phenomenon, right? That is the focus. The focus is not simply to build a theory for the sake of building a theory, right? But in phenomenon-based theorizing, you wanna explain a relevant phenomenon. And to me, a very, very good example for that. I don't know if any one of you has read this paper, but the award-winning article by Alan Afua about crowdsourcing in AMR. So that was obviously at some point in time a very novel and unexplained phenomenon, and Alan Afua and Tucci came along and developed an explanation of this phenomenon, right? And they connected it to theory of human problem solving and search, right? So that was to me the inspiration for embarking on this type of work. And Alan Afua was in fact also my editor for my first AMR paper. So I learned a lot. So just that you understand where am I coming from, right? My mindset is very much aligned with somebody like Alan Afua and his type of work. He even did work on the internet and the boundaries of the firm already 15 years ago, before he went into research on other digital phenomena. So he's been researching digital infrastructure like the internet and digital phenomena like crowdsourcing since 20 years, right? So that's the kind of person that I connect to in terms of my background, my interest in digital and doing theory development. Okay. Now, I guess the agenda for today would be to go a little bit into detail into one example of how I do this phenomenon-based theorizing, okay? And then to generalize from that and say, okay, what are some best practices that emerge from my experience there, okay? So let me share my slides then. See if I can enlarge this. I don't know if this is actually working. Wait a minute. This is what I have to press. Okay. Do you see the full screen now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Great. Just a few words about JAIS because when Dorothy Leitner took over the editor-in-chief role of the JAIS, she had a vision for publishing more theory papers in JS, right? And so she separated the literature review section from the theory section, and appointed me as the senior editor for theory-only papers. Okay. Now, to many people in our field in information systems, this is still a little bit confusing because people think that a theory paper is the same as a literature review. Or in other words, that a theory arises from a literature review. And so there's this confusion. So now there are two different sections. There's a literature review section in JAS, and there's a theory section. So if you submit a paper to me, to my section, you will be expected to create novel theory, but not necessarily provide like a systematic literature review. So it's kind of like the way in which AMR papers are written. So the idea is to have a space within information systems discipline where you can do AMR type theorizing. And personally, I think this is very, very important for our field to move forward because, I mean, just consider, this dilemma that we've always had in IS, that we import and borrow theories from our discipline and apply them and contextualize them to IS context, but oftentimes, we have an issue with what are our IS theories, what are, what, and of course you can name a few, but I think we can really advance this agenda of building more genuine IS theories, right? But for that, we need to embrace a little bit the spirit of an AMR type journal, right? And by the way, I'm just coming back from the annual meeting of the Academy of Management, and it was just announced that AMR was ranked the number one journal in the field of management, according to the Clarivate Journal Impact Factor rankings, right? So it has an impact factor of 19, and has surpassed the Annals Journal, which is, the Annals Journal is more like literature review synthesis, right? AMR is more theory. So that's what I'm talking about in JS, that we separated the two, similar to Annals versus the review, right? In the Academy of Management. So that's how you need to think about this. And AMR just became the number one ranked journal. So I think that these theory papers, they generate a lot of impact, and they can move the field forward. They can provide new perspectives. They can challenge existing theory. They can make you think about a phenomenon in a new way that you hadn't thought about before. And that can spark a lot of empirical research, right? It can provide the basis and the foundation for a lot of future empirical studies. The idea of an AMR paper or the idea of a theory paper in JS would be to write a paper that is the foundation for hundreds of future empirical papers. That's the ambition, okay? And of course, you can read on the slide a little bit more details, but basically, that's how I see it in a nutshell, okay? Now, to me, the source of, the inspiration and the ideas and the observations, like where does a new theory come from? Where does the theory come from? And to me, it comes from an observation in the reality, in business practice, information systems practice, about here's something that we observe today, but it cannot be explained sufficiently well by existing theories. So you look at this phenomenon and you say, well, there is an anomaly. There is you have some kind of a state of confusion, right? Because for example, in this case, you debate the case of Facebook and what it's doing with data and artificial intelligence, and you debate this in the classroom with your students, right? And then you apply the network effect lens to say, well, Facebook is a platform. Platforms exhibit network effects, right? And then you say, well, and then the students kind of give you pushback, right? Because you're teaching with a discussion-based, participant-centered learning approach. So you're not just giving a lecture, but you're debating cases in the classroom. And students, like 70 students in the room, are firing at you and at each other, comments and their own perspective, and really scrutinizing what is this whole case about, right? And you say, well, there is something novel here, and it cannot be explained by existing theory. And then you go back to your desk and you start writing, right? Okay, so that's kind of how a theory can emerge. Okay. Now, of course, that requires a certain kind of a mindset that I talked about earlier, that I developed already during my time at the e-finance lab in Germany, but that I'm now still continuing to nurture from my collaboration with MIT Scissor. It's a mindset of being genuinely interested in how practitioners think about problems and what problems they face, and to be genuinely respectful of the perspective and the knowledge and the experience that these people bring to the table of academic work, as opposed to thinking that we know everything because we're the academics and they think superficially about things. This arrogance that you oftentimes see in academia. So to overcome that and to be humble. So humbleness, open-mindedness, respectful relationship with people in the real world is, an essential foundation for being able to uncover impactful new theories. So that's my belief, okay? And I think there is let me see, just have to monitor here. There is a question that I just want to pick up on here by Justin. Do we need to provide empirical evaluation of theory papers? Absolutely not. Right. So when I say theory only papers, I literally mean theory only. And I think what is important here is to not distract the reader with the empirical, if you write an empirical paper, all the emphasis goes to the empirical analysis, right? Or the empirical evaluation, as you call it here, Justin, right? So you have to have a method section. You have to have a detailed empirical section that provides sufficient transparency into the research process. You cannot just have an empirical section as an add-on of a few pages only, like an alien body of the paper. That's not going to work, right? So if you write an empirical paper, you write an empirical paper. If you write a theory paper, you write a theory paper, right? Okay. And nowadays, journals are also asking us to restrict the number of pages. So for example, AMR, we're expecting people to submit papers that are not longer than 30 pages. So imagine you have 30 pages double spaced, and you want to do an empirical evaluation of your theory within 30, you want to develop the theory and provide the whole introduction, motivation, and the conceptual background for your theory. And then you also want to test the theory in a single paper with 30 pages. How is that going to work, right? So I think it's impossible, absolutely impossible. Okay. So my work that I published in AMR is about platforms, right? And so we know that some of the world's most profitable firms own platforms, and we know that there are network effects. And the more that there are other users on the platform, the more value that I derive as a user from this platform and the products that the platform offers, right? So it's really, value is a function of the network size. Now, we know that there's a lot of research on platforms, and Parker et al. Have even mentioned at some point in one of the book chapters that there is something like data-driven network effects, perhaps, right? But it hasn't been really theorized, right? So to date, when you look at the vast majority of the research, well, I mean, at the time that I was writing my article, at least, the focus was on two categories of network effects: indirect and direct network effects. You can also sometimes, in teaching, we also sometimes refer to this as same-side and cross-side network effects to simplify the language for our students, right? But it's really indirect and direct network effects. Now, little attention has been paid to the role of data and artificial intelligence on platforms. And so I thought this was very surprising. This was very surprising to me. How could one paper after the other analyze data platforms like Google search and other digital platforms where data and AI plays an integral very important role, how could they then just simplify the whole explanation to just network effects? I mean, that was like, to me, a big gap between the reality, the phenomenon that I was observing, and the theory, right? And I wanted to bridge that gap. And you go to the, even when you read like The Economist, it was talking about data, and it was even mentioning data network effects. So there was kind of a body of practitioner articles, whether it's a TechCrunch article, an Economist article, there was even a paper, a blog article by somebody called Turk, and he also talked about the data flywheel and so on. And so there were, the practitioners were starting to pick upon the, jump upon this new phenomenon and starting to write about it. And you say, well, what about management theory? What about network effect theory, right? Okay. So platform exhibits data network effects if the more that the platform learns from the data it collects on users, the more valuable the platform becomes to each user. So there's a spillover effect that has to do not just with the network size and the growing number of users, but there's also a spillover effect that is enabled by the use of artificial intelligence that is able to identify patterns in data, encapsulate that statistical knowledge into models that can then be transferable to other contexts, can be recontextualized and applied to the design of improved features that can benefit all users and create spillover effects based on data-enabled learning. So that is a new category of network effects. And it slowly, it was not easy to get this paper published. There was a lot of resistance from the reviewers. And if it would only be like vote counting reviewers, the paper would have gotten rejected. Okay. So, people who are in these top journals who have been contributing to some theories and developing theories for decades, they oftentimes are maybe a little bit biased, right? They think that their theory is very hard to challenge, and they may be gatekeepers and they don't want to see something new published, right? That challenges existing theory. But so, I had a strong editor, and I think at AMR you generally do have strong editors. And so I was able to get this through. And now we're seeing a few years later that there's a lot of new research coming out on data network effects. I was just reviewing a paper on my flight from Chicago to Miami that is building upon my work and extending it further. So, things are happening. Slowly, this theory is being recognized, and we all know these examples, right? So I don't have to tell you more about this. I think you get the point what the data network effect is. I think many people like you guys who are in the digital innovation, entrepreneurship, transformation space, right? I think you see this every day. This virtuous cycle, this dynamic that is happening, right? Waze is a good example. I think what is important is to recognize the important role of AI. This is something that was not previously theorized much in the platform literature. So, people were talking about network effects on platforms and using examples of data and AI-enabled platforms without really theorizing the role of AI and, in a way, black boxing it, okay? So that's, of course, the advantage that you have when you come from information systems, that you pay attention to the IT artifact, right? And you go deeper into the IT artifact because you have a genuine interest in technology. You don't just black box the technology. So that's kind of an advantage that you have. You need to leverage your unique background as an academic, whatever your background is. Not all of you, of course, have an information systems background, but may come from other fields. And whatever background you have, you want to leverage that in your theorizing to make a unique contribution, right? I was really interested in this interaction of the users with the platform, as opposed to black boxing the technology and just looking at user-to-user interactions as if the technology didn't play any role, right? Apart from providing an infrastructure. So when you read Parker's work, he talks about technology providing an infrastructure. And while that is true, I would argue that the technology's role today is more than just providing a static or just a foundational infrastructure. I would argue that the technology has agency and influences and shapes people's perceptions and people's actions and interactions, and it is an integral part. It is there's a computer in the middle of every transaction on the platform, and that shapes their behaviors and their expectations and so on and so forth. So this picture that we typically draw in our teaching for our students, that it's like, oh yeah, there's a user to user and there's nothing, that doesn't really work for me, right? So what about the technology? The platform is not just a marketplace. Well, here's maybe something very interesting. When you look at the platform literature, there are two strands of thought. One is that a platform from an economics perspective is simply a matchmaker. It matches supply and demand. So when you look at this platform phenomenon from this, let's say, more macro, like economic perspective, you wouldn't get to any theory of data network effects, right? But if you look at the platform also from an architectural and a technological perspective and a design perspective, and you say, what is the platform constituted of? What is the platform? And you say, well, there are algorithms that are being trained based on data, and they are embedded into product design processes. And then, there's something like product management, product development, innovation processes happening within the platform company, right? And users interact with the products on the platform that are with embedded artificial intelligence algorithms that determine a lot the features and the behaviors of these products. And there is a human-machine interaction taking place, right? So, so when you start unpacking what this platform actually is, it's not just a matchmaker. It's not just matching supply and demand, right? So it's so much more than that, but it depends on your perspective. Okay. This was one of the initial brainstormings that we did. I just wanted to show you this for those who think that you just write a theory paper and in one go, like a waterfall development, and then you're done. No, that's not the case, right? So writing pure theory papers is a highly iterative, agile process, right? Highly collaborative, highly incremental, and highly iterative in its nature. So you need to adopt an agile mindset. And here, obviously, this initial attempt of theorizing, which we presented at the Academy of Management 2 years before we published the article, obviously was not what you saw later in the published article, right? So there is a big difference between this and what we saw later in the article, okay? But I'm showing you just as those of you who think that read these articles that are published and you say, I want to write an article like that, and you want to, it's not, you don't get it right in the first attempt. So you have to take an agile approach, okay? A very important aspect of publishing in general, but it's the same for pure theory papers, is that you need to connect to a scholarly conversation. I view I view pure theory development similar to other types of research as joining and extending a scholarly conversation, right? And Afua, he is one of the persons who has done research on network effects. So, in a way, my work connected well to his previous work. And basically, this is one of the papers that I drew upon as a foundation, right? As a starting point, as a point of departure, right? And he said that network effects are not just about size. And that one sentence connected so extremely well with my observation in the classroom. So remember what I said in the beginning. I said, I made this observation that Facebook is using data. I wrote this Facebook case. I was teaching the Facebook case in my MBA classes, right? At ES back in the days. And my MBA students, 70 students from 9 to 10, 15, and then another 70 students from 10:30 to, you get the point, right? So I'm teaching this case one session after the other with multiple groups, and getting this confusion, this constant confusion, like what's going on here? My teaching is not going so well. Why is my teaching not going well? right? And then you say, yeah, network effects are not just about size, right? I mean, in a sense, my students were telling me exactly that, but not using these words. So then you have really connected to a conversation. And then the other thing is um, the role of structure, and network conduct was already emerging in some of my other research, right? So when I was doing this empirical research, I was observing that it's not just about size, okay? So basically, now you see it not just in one case, but you're starting to see many more examples in your overall portfolio of observations that you're making, whether it's anecdotal observations or systematic observations, as in the Uber case. And you're basically seeing there is something like data network effects. It's happening, right? And then you develop some assumptions, right? And based on the assumptions, you then go and start theorizing, okay? So I'm not going to talk too much about all these different assumptions, but they are pretty important for the theory. Yeah, Oliver.
Just a quick question. How did you decide that you would write a theory paper on this phenomenon that you've noticed then? Because I imagine you could have maybe as well have looked for empirical evidence and then written an empirical paper, right?
Exactly. Well, I think there are multiple answers to this question. The first answer is that when an empirical stream of research has become, there has been like this path dependency where every empirical paper on network effects is sort of, because of what reviewers are looking for and editors are looking for, and every empirical paper is being pushed in the same direction to build upon and extend the existing theory. So it's always network effect. It follows the same pattern, that there's path dependency, and there's a lot of inertia that is created by path dependency. It creates these self-reinforcing effects. When you've seen like 100 papers on network effects being published, everybody starts to believe that this is a very solid theory and it cannot be challenged. Okay. So if you want to shift the conversation in quite a different direction, writing yet another empirical paper and then saying there's data network effect, it's going to be very hard to convince the people. They're just going to say, I don't believe you. Right? What you are seeing empirically is just network effect. And so you have to break this this tide. And so how do you do that? And Academy of Management Review was founded as a journal to provide a space for thought-provoking, future-oriented theory articles that can shift the conversation in a new direction. That's the purpose of the whole journal. Now, to be fair, Oliver, when I say this now, I didn't know this when I was writing this article and making the decision to submit this to this journal. I didn't have this holistic understanding and was able to rationalize it the way that I'm doing it right now here today. Right? It has taken me a long journey of many, many years to get to this point to be able to rationalize it this way. And to be totally honest, Oliver, I think when I was doing this, I didn't have any role model. I didn't have anybody who could advise me that this is the right path to take. I had nobody in my network who had published an AMR. I didn't even know many people from information systems who publish an AMR at all. So I mean, this idea of AMR came out of pure luck. It just crossed my way, right? And it crossed my way because ESA Business School was hosting the AMR hackathon. So all of a sudden, I had worked at ESA for multiple years already, and ESA has a mindset of publishing FT50, and they have a general management mindset where you don't view yourself just as an information systems professor and teach information systems, but the mindset at ESA is general management, right? So we want to train leaders, the future leaders, and so basically it's a general management mindset. You don't think in silos. That's not, if you teach that way, you're going to get completely bashed in your evaluation criteria. So basically, I was open-minded at that point about how do management scholars look at our phenomena in digital, in IS, and so on, right? And so I was open-minded. Then I learned about AMR coming to Barcelona. I said, well, I need to take that learning opportunity. So it was a pure growth mindset thing at that point. It was purely growth mindset. It was, hey, my past capabilities don't determine future capabilities. I don't view my career as static, right? But dynamic, and I can always learn new things, and I want to learn new things, right? I'm not afraid of getting out of my comfort zone. Quite the contrary. I look for new challenges constantly because I want to learn and improve and broaden my horizon. So it is a growth mindset paired with a general management perspective on teaching and research and IS professional, being an IS professional, taking a general management mindset. So it's that combination plus luck that AMR had decided they come to Barcelona. Plus the skill of having done many papers over many years that I kind of know how to write papers. So I wrote a paper that AMR editor-in-chief selected for the workshop for the hackathon, right? So so it's a combination of all these things, and then I kind of get into this AMR thing through the hackathon. So it was a 2-day event, and I connect to Al Nafua, and Al Nafua tells me this is match made in heaven. So okay. So yeah, now at this point I'm getting lucky, right? So basically, yeah, I'm just telling you the true story, right? In a way, like the unfiltered true story. But if I would rationalize it today, what I said initially is how I rationalize it.
Great. Thank you very much.
So the model looks pretty simple, I know, but I think there's a lot to it to unpack each one of these relationships in separate studies, each one of these concepts and relationships and hypotheses or propositions, higher level propositions that we develop, to unpack them in future empirical studies. It's also very static, right? Ideally, you would be able to theorize the virtuous cycles and the self-reinforcement, and maybe have some kind of process theory around this. I mean, there's a lot of more work that needs to be done, but it's an initial step, and it was like following a template that Al Nafua recommended to me, right? So with Al Nafua's help, I was able to, put my ideas into a mold that could become, more easily publishable, right? So following, in a way, scripts that exist in the journal, okay? But I think it's a good initial step, right? It sparks a conversation. So I won't go into all of the details of the theory itself. I will try to go through this very quickly because I want to get to, in a way, a more interactive discussion about the theorizing process, because at the end of the day, we're here today to learn about how do we do phenomenon-based theorizing and why do we do it, right? But just just walk through this very quickly. So there's the platform AI capability. So this is kind of the main concept in the beginning that has a relationship to perceived user value. It's of course based on our received understanding and knowledge about prediction and how machine learning at the core helps us improve the speed and the accuracy of predictions. That's what it is. That's what it boils down to. There are many examples, of course, right? It's rooted in a view of artificial intelligence that the Nobel Prize winner Herbert Simon has started to develop already a long time ago. This idea of learning from examples, right? So we've known for a long time the basic principles and ideas behind artificial intelligence ever since the 1950s. Research has been done about this, and so we're building upon that knowledge in our theorizing. Okay, this is nothing new. Of course, we also ground or anchor our theorizing in theories of prediction, right? Because yes, there is machine-enabled prediction and data-driven predictions, but of course, it is helpful to understand how this relates to theories of prediction more generally, right? Because at the end of the day, machines don't make predictions alone, but there's always like some human machine interaction in the development and training of the machine learning models and in the use of those models to make decisions and so on and so forth. So it's not like you can just say it's just technological, right? So that wouldn't make any sense. Of course, we distinguish between the speed of prediction and the accuracy of prediction, and those are the first two propositions. Of course, we always give examples so that people can, understand the theory. The accessibility, increasing the accessibility of the theory, which means the easy readability, comprehensibility, and so on. So I don't get confused I don't get lost when I read. Okay, this is extremely important, right? So this is this is basically just writing technique. Data quantity and quality, obviously simplified here a little bit. Initially, we talked about data variety, data volume, and so on and so forth. And then we just boiled it down to data quantity and quality. That seemed to be kind of easier for us to develop the propositions. Data stewardship. So that's the overarching umbrella concept that we introduced to make sense of this. Of course, here, sorry, I want to go one slide back. Obviously, we build upon research that has been conducted in IS as well before. For example, my collaborator Barbara Wixom has done research about this, so I build upon her work there as well, right? Okay. Then the role of data quality, and then I'm just going to go through this. User-centric design, very important moderator as well. So you have an engine, right? The platform AI capability. You have the fuel, the data, but then you need to place the engine in a well-designed car, which are the products and the services that users actually use on the platform. So design plays a very important role, right? That's why I guess many people love these German cars, right? Okay. And consumerization. I built upon some of my previous work on IT consumerization, which blurs the line between consumption and production, and so that plays a role in my thinking, in my theorizing, right? And then I developed the proposition about the user-centric design. And by the way, when I say I know, we were a team, of course, right? So don't get me wrong. I was the first author in, but of course, we have three other co-authors. I'm just going to name them out of respect here. So Ola Hendrickson, of course, Harris Kriyaku, who is now at ISEC Business School, and my old friend Evgeny Kagana, who is at ESA Business School. So that's when I say I, Then, of course, there's also the platform legitimization. That is something that is very important because we have seen that platforms oftentimes become very illegitimate, right? Their data practices and AI practices are considered to be problematic by external stakeholders and the society and the regulator and so on, right? And so how do you legitimize that? So that becomes an important dimension of the phenomenon, okay? Balancing diverse stakeholder interests, and then theorizing about the role of legitimacy, and then more in detail, personal data use is very important, right? To what extent does that align with norms and expectations around privacy and security and so on, right? And the explainability of AI. Already back then in 2009, 18, 19, when we did this research, that was emerging as a very important aspect as well, right? So I think the main point here is that the utility that a user derives from a platform is increasingly both a function of the scale of the network, which is the traditional network effects, and data-driven learning and improvements enabled by AI. Okay, and so this highlights the need in future research to examine interactions between network effects and data-enabled learning processes that underlie these data network effects, right? So that's where the journey is going. That's what people are now working on. Now, this is maybe important here. Let me see if I can go back previous. I'm trying to kind of go through this very quickly because I don't want to overwhelm you in 1.5 hours with all the details of the theory that I'm developing. But there is also, of course, a debate that has unfolded about the conditions for these data network effects. When and why should we expect a data network effect to be created? It's not. We don't have a deterministic viewpoint that it will always happen, right? There are many platforms where it doesn't happen. So there are conditions. And so this is a separate AMR. So this was there was a debate and we responded to the debate with our response. So that's a separate AMR article that you need to read if you want to learn more about the conditions for data network effects. Okay. Right. So I have all these slides that capture this debate, right? Okay, and then I want to get kind of to basically the editorial that we wrote, right? But maybe I'll just pause here for a moment to see where we are in terms of time and any questions. Yeah, Cynthia, yeah, I see your comment. Engine fuel, beautiful car. Yeah, I mean, I think this is an important point about communicating a theory in a way that is accessible and enjoyable to read. We have like a story that we tell in the paper, right? So in the beginning of each section, I mean, the transitions and the introductions in sections, they are crafted in a way that it makes it easy for the reader to follow and to relate to, right? So these analogies can help the reader. Okay, so why we did this. I know it's a little bit oversimplistic. I mean, many of you would probably not even agree with me that data is oil, right? Recently, now I just have a paper. Where is that paper? I just had it on the flight. I don't know if it's MISQ, but basically it says data is the new protein, right? So, but data is not just oil. I get it, right? But for this audience, right? For this audience, it worked well. Okay, it was a strategy audience, so a macro level, right? Strategy audience. Okay, any questions so far?